These cartels have declared war on us. We need to go on offense and use every asset that we have to start dismantling and taking them down.
When I am president, it will be the policy of the United States to take down the cartels, just as we took down ISIS and the ISIS Caliphate.
Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has accused the United States of spying after U.S. prosecutors announced charges against 28 members of the Sinaloa cartel, including the 3 sons of the infamous drug lord El Chapo.
New information just leaked about the U.S. launching missiles to Mexico to destroy the cartels. This time, the government is prepared for an all-out war, and it's going to be a bloodbath that would make Narcos look like a kid's show. And while some experts are saying it would kill millions, there are now rumors of how the invasion would ruin countless lives in ways far more horrific than those of the historic US-Mexican War.
The cartels who are watching, pay attention, I'm talking to you now, with no additional laws. Within 2 weeks of the inauguration in 2025, on January 20th, 2025, if President Trump is inaugurated, within 2 weeks, you're shut down.
Mexican cartels have always had a reputation for being heavily armed. Plus, they have expert training on how to handle and use weapons. Whether it's the Sinaloa's drone bombs and armored cars to the CJNG's 50 caliber assault rifles and RPGs, these cartels don't hold back when it comes to firepower. Things have gotten even more heated these last few years, as lots of police crackdowns and inner power tussles have pushed these crime syndicates to get even more sophisticated weapons and personnel for extra protection. Judging by the arsenal alone, the highly trained squadrons are well equipped to take on the US Army any day. But it's not just about firepower though. These guys also have military training. Recent revelations during the trial of El Menchito, son of Mexico's most notorious cartel leader, claimed that the young criminal had once hired the Russian army to train his men and also purchased weaponry from them. It's no wonder why the CJNG cartel members appear very much like special forces or a deadly military unit. These guys even took down a military chopper with an RPG some years ago, killing about 13 people in the process. But then, the CJNG isn't the only cartel that can give the US a run for their money. Other cartels can equally pose a challenge to eradicate thanks to their sophisticated weaponry. So, imagine a case whereby the US government launches an attack, but then these criminals launch a counterattack of their own immediately in response. Or even worse, imagine a situation whereby all the cartel leaders decided to put away their sentiments and differences to join forces against a common enemy, the US government. Notorious groups like the Sinaloa and CJNG may even go as far as getting help from international criminal organizations or hiring entire armies to join in the battle. And who knows, the CJNG may just call in mercenaries from Russia, and if that happens, the US might just lose the war altogether. Speaking of weaponry, new reports have come in that cartel members are smuggling weapons from the US. It's still a mystery where these guys get their supplies from, but it's been confirmed that they're going for even more deadly weapons in preparation for a US invasion. One such weapon is the FGM-148 Javelin infrared guided missile launcher. Just so you know, the FGM-148 Javelin is an anti-tank missile with a mind-blowing capacity for destruction. The missiles, when fired, travel at near the speed of sound, able to locate targets several meters away. With weapons like these, cartels can pull off missile strikes from the US-Mexico border or anywhere else they choose. Interestingly, one Sinaloa cartel member who went by the name El Flaco spoke with authorities during a private interview about this particular weapon. The gangster revealed that this weapon was one of the Sinaloa cartel's top secrets. The man in question was a mercenary who had received expert training on how to use the weapon and also trained many other members of the cartel alike. When asked why Mexican cartels were going to such an extent, his reply was, "It's to show the government, perhaps this one or the incoming one, that they have the ability to launch attacks of this kind with the weaponry they have. It's their secret weapon. They can use it if necessary." That is my impression. Interestingly, this shocking revelation came in late 2024, just after the US government revealed plans to launch missile strikes of their own.
Following the kidnapping and killing of Americans in Mexico, lawmakers are getting serious about the impacts cartels are having on both sides of the border.
Yes, Lauren Blanchard is in Washington now with more.
These cartels have declared war on us. We need to go on offense and use every asset that we have to start dismantling and taking them down.
There are renewed calls to designate cartels foreign terrorist organizations after 4 Americans were taken hostage just across the border. 2 were killed. If approved by lawmakers, the bill would criminalize helping cartels, give law enforcement more power, and allow the Treasury to freeze assets.
I also want to add something beyond the criminal model. I want to put military force on the table, because if this is not an attack on America, what would be?
There's no doubt that the battle line has been drawn, and both sides are ready for an all-out war. But who will be the one to draw first blood? Speaking of drawing blood, it's important to note that the bloodshed won't just be that of soldiers and cartel members. Innocent civilians would be caught up in the crossfire as well. It's going to be guerrilla warfare, with casualties on both sides. The US government is well aware of this, which is why they're calculating their next steps very carefully. The fact that cartel members measure up to thousands of individuals doesn't make the situation any better. I mean, the Sinaloa cartel alone is said to have around 150,000 members. That's about the size of an army. In short, things could get messy real fast. The US government knows this, which is why it's still carrying out undercover operations in Mexico, tearing up gangs and cartels in Mexico little by little before striking the final blow. But these subtle operations in Mexican soils haven't gone unnoticed. And now, cartels aren't the only ones gearing up for a US invasion. Even the Mexican government is becoming wary of the US.
Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has accused the United States of spying after U.S. prosecutors announced charges against 28 members of the Sinaloa cartel, including the 3 sons of the infamous drug lord El Chapo.
The U.S. government, always 2 steps ahead, is setting up deeper roots in Mexico. But then, you can't help but wonder if all this would truly aid in winning the war against Mexican cartels, or if it will only provoke the cartels to do more damage. Already, intelligence has revealed that the cartels have deep ties on both sides of the border. In other words, cartels have spies and agents on US soil, as well as strongholds in cities like Dallas, Los Angeles, Chicago, Phoenix, and pretty much any other major city you can think of. And so, immediately, the US government launches an attack. These criminals in foreign lands will retaliate, and it's no doubt going to be catastrophic. In case you're wondering how these cartels manage to sneak members into the US, it's all through immigration. Research has shown a direct relationship between the influx of Mexican immigrants and the increased crime rate in the US in recent years. It turns out that these cartels disguise themselves as illegal immigrants to enter the US, where they traffic drugs and cause other havoc.
The state's southern border, where, according to law enforcement, Mexican cartels are playing a part in the migrant surge into the U.S. Our own Andres Zaya continues our coverage from the U.S.-Mexico border.
Right behind this wall right here is Ciudad Juárez, Mexico, where migrants are lining up to get processed in order to seek asylum into the United States. Now, this process takes a long time, but some of them are taking desperate measures to get across.
Make no mistake about it. The cartels are involved in everything occurring along the border. There's no doubt about it.
Right now, no one knows just how many members of Mexican drug cartels live on the US side of the border, but it's safe to assume they measure in hundreds of thousands. And so, the US government going to war against Mexican cartels is pretty much the same as going to war against itself. The violence will spill over to ruin even the lives of American citizens and refugees. Mexican cartels are renowned for their ruthlessness, as they've even targeted Mexican law enforcement agencies several times. In fact, in many parts of the country, cartels are respected and their bosses are feared. Men like El Mencho pretty much have the Mexican police wrapped around their thumbs.
Delta 1. Hey, ¿quién habla? Mira bien, hijo de tu madre. Soy Mencho, güey. Relájate. Gente a la... Soy Mencho, güey. Relájate. Partida, si no te voy a partir tu madre, tienes toda tu bola de perros. Te tengo identificados 30 güeyes. Hasta tus perros te voy a matar si no te relajas, güey. ¿Cómo ves? Ya está, señor, ahorita los vamos. ¿Se me ponen a tiro o tú eres el primero que vas a matar por ellos, León? Señor, usted me conoce, usted sabe que yo... Uno no se mete con ustedes para que se pasen de... No, señor, ahorita yo se las bajo. Mire, revíremeles a todos los hijos de... Porque todos agarran dinero y son buenos de puercos. No quiero que me apagues este teléfono, después te voy a marcar, güey, a ver si no se relajaron a la... Sí, señor, usted me conoce, usted sabe que hay respeto.
Given the strong influence drug cartels have in Mexico, these gangs may even spur the citizens and the government to join the fight against the United States government. It wouldn't be the first time Mexico is rebelling against the United States government. The country has always frowned against the US launching an attack on their soil, even if the attack was targeted at cartels only. This isn't the first time the Mexican president has made such remarks about the US. Judging by the reactions and statements so far, it's presumably correct that Mexico is very prepared to launch missiles of its own if the US dares to invade the cartels in Mexico. And by the way, it wouldn't be the first time Mexico is firing missiles against the US. Recently, just after Iran fired ballistic missiles at Israel in October 2024, they got a warning from the United States government. But then, like an uninvited guest, Mexico fired missiles of their own in support of Iran. This is just a shadow of things to come. If the US decides to take out the cartels, the government might join in the fight, and so the battle would continue escalating until both countries become a battlefield. But then again, there are other ways a full launch attack on cartels can backfire on the United States. One way is the disruption of the intricate narcotics network that spans across both countries. As of March 2024, statistics show that about 70 million Americans are addicted to drugs. It is estimated that about 1 in 4 Americans aged 12 and over are addicted to one sort of narcotic or the other. The US is one of the biggest consumers of illicit drugs in the world, with over $150 million pouring down the drain every year on drugs like cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl. But here's the kicker. Most of these drugs come from Mexico and other Latin American countries like Colombia. Drug shippers use the extensive US-Mexico border to slip through tons of narcotics every year, so much so that the situation has grown out of hand. In short, the ongoing drug pandemic in the US is the real driving force behind their intentions to destroy cartels in Mexico once and for all. For some reason, Donald Trump has been speaking up in the ongoing war against the cartels and their abuse of the Mexico border, and most of his campaign speeches have revolved around the problem. For Trump, he's willing to take things up a step further, shutting down the border if necessary.
In this war, Joe Biden has sided against the United States and with the cartels. They are making more money than they've ever made before, times 10. There's never been anything like it. They're major companies. They're bigger than even some of our biggest companies. Biden's open border policies are a deadly betrayal of our nation. When I am president, it will be the policy of the United States to take down the cartels, just as we took down ISIS and the ISIS caliphate, and just as, unlike the situation we're in today, we had a very strong border, the strongest border, in fact, in the history of our country.
Trump has also mentioned unleashing the full might of the military and launching missiles too.
In addition to restoring strong border security, I will deploy all necessary military assets, including the U.S. Navy, to impose the full naval embargo on the cartels. I did that before and it worked. What we did was incredible. We will guarantee that the waters of the Western Hemisphere are not used to traffic illicit drugs to our country. Furthermore, I will order the Department of Defense to make appropriate use of special forces, cyber warfare, and other overt and covert actions.
Just in case you think the idea of the US government launching missiles against Mexican cartels is an exaggeration, think again. While the Biden administration may have held back on this, the previous one didn't. Trump was more than willing to nuke all the cartels in Mexico to put an end to issues like the fentanyl pandemic. In fact, all hell nearly broke loose, save for a timely intervention of political advice.
Good morning. The New York Times is reporting former President Donald Trump once proposed using missiles to destroy drug labs in Mexico. It's one of the revelations in a new book from former Defense Secretary Mark Esper titled A Sacred Oath. According to the Times, which obtained a copy of the memoir, quote, when Mr. Esper raised various objections, Mr. Trump said, we could just shoot some Patriot missiles and take out the labs quietly, adding, no one would know it was us.
Trump had all but shot those missiles, if not that he was called to reason by his defense secretary.
All right, now to more of our interview with former Defense Secretary Mark Esper for his new book, A Sacred Oath. On this Sunday, 60 Minutes, Esper describes when President Trump suggested launching a secret missile attack on a neighboring country.
The president pulls me aside on at least a couple occasions and suggests that maybe we have the U.S. military shoot missiles into Mexico.
Shoot missiles into Mexico for what?
He would say to go after the cartels. And we would have this private discussion where I'd say, Mr. President, I understand the motive, because he was very serious about dealing with drugs in America. I get that. We all understand. But I had to explain to him, we can't do that. It would violate international law. It would be terrible for our neighbors to the south. It would, impact us in so many ways. Why don't we do this instead?
You politely push back on the idea. Did President Trump really say no one would know it was us?
Yes.
And just in case you think that chapter has been closed, far from it. In fact, with Trump running for president again, he might have the opportunity to finally make this dream come true. The aspiring president has made his displeasure and anger towards cartel nuisance in America very obvious and is very much ready to do whatever it takes to flush these gangs out and make America safe again. It's safe to say that if Trump is allowed to press that button, he won't blink twice, even if it means releasing nukes.
Children are being left without parents, families are being ripped apart, communities are being decimated. Our neighbors and fellow citizens are having their entire worlds destroyed. Destroyed like nobody thought possible. Our country is being poisoned from within by the drugs and by all of the other crime that's taking place. The drug cartels are waging war in America, and it's now time for America to wage war on the cartels.
As Trump mentioned, the crime network in the US runs deep, so deep that several big corporations and law enforcement make massive profits from the billion-dollar market. If the cartels supplying these drugs are taken out, these corporations might revolt, starting a firestorm that no one in both countries would be able to quench. These corporations can also turn to other sources in order to satisfy the high demand, and things may end up just as bad as before, or even worse. Moreover, taking out the major cartels would leave a power vacuum, and the remaining bodies involved in the underworld drug trade would fight for supremacy. Picture this: when Pablo Escobar was taken out of the picture, his absence left a power vacuum behind in Colombia's crime underworld. Smaller cartels and drug lords began to fight for supremacy, and a whole lot of violence broke out. The same could happen in Mexico, as smaller gangs would fight for absolute supremacy. Already we've seen something like this unfold in recent times, since the arrests of El Chapo and El Mayo. The two major families of the Sinaloa cartel have been at each other's throats since the bosses got incarcerated, and not even the Mexican government has been able to restore order.
And south of the U.S. border, rival factions of the Sinaloa cartel are at war, and Mexico's president says the United States is to blame. Violence between the Mayos and the Chapos continues. This in the aftermath of the U.S. arrest of two key cartel leaders.
In scenarios like these, the destruction and chaos is felt more by the citizens than the leaders who started it all. It won't take long before citizens start fleeing the country. Mexicans would want to flee to the U.S., while Americans may want to flee to other neighboring countries. All this can lead to a massive refugee crisis, as well as massive commotion at the US-Mexico border. Back in 2010, Mexico's drug war led to the displacement of over 300,000 people. This time, the amount of people who would be displaced may number in the millions. We might see the numbers of desolate citizens rise up to the likes of the Syrian refugee crisis, where 6.6 million people were forced to flee. Worse still, the situation may lead to even more problems, like stampedes, nationwide unrest, hunger, and even more deaths. Take a minute to reflect on the massive devastation that followed when Israel launched bombs on Gaza back in 2023. The ruthless attacks on Gaza left countless wounded. A huge percentage of the population had to flee their homes, and others had to find alternate ways to survive. It was total chaos, something that no one planned for. This same predicament might just befall the good people of Mexico, or even the Americans living there, if the US decides to open fire. However, the citizens won't be the only ones caught in trouble. The government would be in a tight fix too. Already, the Mexican government, in recent times, has shown signs of displeasure against the US in how they handle matters relating to crime organizations. From secret arrests to unannounced investigations and talks about a full-on attack, the Mexican government has had many reasons to show displeasure and unease towards the US leaders. And so, in the event of a drug war, they'd have to fight back. But doing so will mean throwing away all the years of mutually beneficial relationship that has existed between the two countries. After all, the US is only doing the Mexican government a favor, as drug cartels have been a menace for more than half a century.
He came from a small village in Sinaloa. Street thug, moved up pretty quickly. Smart though, for somebody with a very limited education, he saw an opportunity.
Gangs like the Gulf Cartel and the Guadalajara cartels were established back in the 1970s. These criminal organizations have interwoven into the very structure and culture of the nation that they're considered family, and so it would be difficult for the Mexican government to kick against them. But then, if the Mexican government decides to side with the US and allow them to rain fire and brimstone on the cartel headquarters, they would face serious backlash at home. Citizens would see such action as a blatant negligence of duty, and so, from protest to impeachment, the Mexican government would succumb to very intense pressure from the people. Things might even spiral out of control to be just as bad as how things were during the Mexican Revolution, where over 1.5 million people died. So, at the end of the day, it's a very serious dilemma for Mexico's president. Allowing the US government free rein would mean rebellion from its citizens, but on the other hand, resisting the US would mean an all-out war or a full-blown international crisis. The destruction, as well as the death toll, would be insanely massive. In Mexico, you can't talk about the cartels without talking about the paramilitary groups. In the event of a drug war, these guys will also play a role. For instance, the Zetas, one of Mexico's most crime organizations, are also a paramilitary group. In other words, they were once special forces in the military before going rogue. These guys can easily recruit and arm more fighters, and their military experience would very much influence the course of the war. Plus, they're never afraid to go for the kill. And besides, even if the US somehow won the war, these groups could simply regroup and restart a cartel, beginning another round of violence and oppression.
Paraded for the cameras, these men are suspected of killing dozens of people in the Gulf Coast state of Veracruz.
After being captured, they told us of another 3 safe houses where 32 bodies were found.
The Navy says the suspects are part of the so-called New Generation gang, and that the group was also behind the killing of 35 people whose bodies were dumped on a highway in Veracruz 2 weeks ago. Along with the New Generation suspects, on Friday the Navy showed off a dozen members of the Zetas gang, including the group's alleged leader of its Veracruz branch.
With tempers boiling and trigger fingers itching, it's only a matter of time before the Great Drug War begins. Amid the inevitable loss of lives, another severe casualty that has been anticipated is the economic impact the drug war would have on the economy of both nations. The relationship between Mexico and the US has always yielded great returns. In recent years, both nations have almost $700 billion in trade every year, but all that will go down the drain if the US invades Mexican cartels. The economics of both nations will suffer shockwaves like never seen before, and the aftermath will be terrible. Think back for a minute to Mexico's 1994 tequila crisis, where poverty became the order of the day. As a result, crime rates surged and new gangs rose. History might just repeat itself again if Biden or Trump gives the go-ahead for a cartel invasion. In any case, that's about the whole gist of it. An organized raid on Mexican cartels might be the solution to the United States drug cartel problem. But then, the risks are just too high. Taking out the cartels may cause a deadly chain reaction that would completely destabilize both countries. It's a gamble that can go either way, and there's no guarantee who would win. Let's know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel to enjoy more videos like this. See you in the next video.